In a landmark decision that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has struck down the legal foundation of President Trump's aggressive tariff strategy, sending shockwaves through Washington and reverberating across the global economy. The steps of the Supreme Court, usually a place of quiet dignity, have become the epicenter of a political earthquake, as reporters scramble to capture the magnitude of this historic ruling. The court ruled, in a sharply worded opinion, that President Trump overstepped his constitutional authority by invoking emergency powers to impose sweeping tariffs for long-term economic protectionism. This decision halts a cornerstone of his presidency and calls into question the limits of executive power. The justices emphasized that while the president has broad authority in matters of national security, using those powers to reshape the nation's economic landscape without clear congressional approval is a step too far. The justices declared that the laws used to justify these sweeping tariffs were misapplied, shattering the administration's carefully constructed trade plan. In the aftermath, both Congress and the White House are left scrambling for a path forward, as lawmakers debate how to reclaim their constitutional role in setting trade policy. The ruling has ignited fierce debate on Capitol Hill, with some calling for new legislation to clarify the boundaries of presidential power, while others warn of unintended consequences for America's global standing. Billions of dollars in collected tariffs are now in legal limbo, opening the door to massive financial restitution for affected businesses and foreign governments. Companies that have paid steep import taxes are already preparing lawsuits to recover their losses, while trade partners demand compensation. The uncertainty is rippling through supply chains, as importers and exporters alike try to assess the impact on their bottom lines. The ruling fundamentally alters the balance of presidential authority in trade, reasserting Congress's constitutional role and directly challenging the core of Trump's America First doctrine. For decades, presidents have pushed the boundaries of their trade powers, but this decision draws a clear line in the sand. Legal scholars say it could reshape how future administrations approach economic policy, forcing greater collaboration between the executive and legislative branches. As businesses, consumers, and international partners react, the future of American trade policy is thrown into deep uncertainty. Manufacturers worry about the return of foreign competition, while farmers and exporters hope for relief from retaliatory tariffs. International leaders are closely watching Washington, weighing how the shift might affect global trade negotiations and alliances. The ripple effects are being felt in boardrooms and households alike, as everyone tries to anticipate what comes next. This is a pivotal moment in modern American history, one that redefines the balance of power between the branches of government and sets a precedent for generations to come. The echoes of this decision will be heard not just in legal textbooks, but in the daily lives of Americans and the strategies of world leaders. The urgent question now is, what happens next? As the landscape of trade and executive power is forever changed, policymakers, businesses, and citizens alike are left searching for answers. Will Congress step up to fill the void, or will new legal battles further complicate America's role in the world economy? One thing is certain, the gavel has fallen, and the rules of the game have changed. The Supreme Court's majority opinion delivered a clear and unmistakable message to the nation and the world. The president's power, even in times of crisis, is not without limits. The justices, in their carefully worded decision, underscored the foundational principle that the United States is a government of laws, not of men. Their ruling was not just a technical interpretation of statutes, but a resounding statement about the structure of American democracy and the importance of constitutional checks and balances. The court made it clear that the president cannot simply invoke emergency statutes as a blank check to wage a long-term trade war, or to reshape the nation's economic relationships with the world. Emergency powers, the justices emphasized, are meant for genuine short-term crises, not as a tool for pursuing broad, ongoing policy goals that should be debated and decided by Congress. In their analysis, the justices found that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, was never intended to grant the executive branch unchecked authority for indefinite economic protectionism. The law was designed to give the president flexibility in the face of sudden threats, but not to bypass the legislative process or to undermine the role of Congress in setting the nation's trade policy. The court's opinion drew on decades of legal precedent and the clear language of the Constitution, reinforcing the idea that no single branch of government can act alone when it comes to matters of such national importance. The court drew a sharp and unmistakable line between temporary emergency actions and permanent economic policy. By doing so, it reaffirmed that Congress, not the president, holds the ultimate authority to set the terms of international trade. This distinction is crucial, as it preserves the balance of power envisioned by the founders and ensures that major policy decisions reflect the will of the people through their elected representatives. This decision stands as a direct rebuke of the administration's legal strategy, which sought to expand executive power at the expense of congressional oversight. It is also a powerful affirmation of the separation of powers, a core principle that has guided the nation since its founding. Legal experts and commentators have hailed the ruling as a necessary corrective, one that restores the proper balance between the branches of government and protects against the dangers of executive overreach. The ruling now forces any future president, regardless of party, to seek explicit congressional approval for sweeping trade actions that could reshape the economy. This restores critical checks and balances, ensuring that no president can unilaterally impose far-reaching economic measures without the consent of the legislative branch. It is a reminder that the American system is designed to prevent the concentration of power and to encourage cooperation and debate among the branches of government. Ultimately, this is a landmark judgment on the limits of executive authority in the 21st century. It will shape the relationship between the presidency and Congress for years to come, serving as a precedent for future disputes over the scope of presidential power. In reaffirming the boundaries of executive action, the Supreme Court has once again played its vital role as guardian of the Constitution and protector of American democracy. The Supreme Court's ruling specifically targets tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, rendering billions in duties on Chinese goods illegal. These tariffs must end immediately, and the government faces a logistical nightmare over potential refunds. Not all Trump-era tariffs were struck down. Those on steel and aluminum under other statutes remain for now untouched. The most dramatic effect is on U.S.-China trade, as the administration loses its primary leverage in negotiations. Companies that restructured supply chains to avoid these duties now face costly uncertainty. Customs officials are left in limbo, and importers may seek refunds for over $200 billion in illegal tariffs. The financial and administrative fallout is staggering. This Supreme Court decision is a historic check on the steady expansion of presidential power, especially in foreign policy and national security. For decades, Congress delegated broad authority to the executive branch, but critics warned of an imperial presidency. The ruling echoes landmark cases like Youngstown, reasserting that major economic policy requires legislative approval. Future presidents will now face higher legal barriers to using emergency powers for sweeping economic actions. The decision compels a return to collaboration between Congress and the White House on trade. It recalibrates, not eliminates, presidential power, reinforcing constitutional guardrails. The precedent set today will shape the balance of power for generations. Legal experts across the country are calling the Supreme Court's ruling a masterclass in constitutional restraint, highlighting the court's deliberate choice to emphasize the importance of legal process over the substance of policy. Rather than wading into the political fray or taking a stance on the wisdom of the tariffs themselves, the justices focused on the boundaries of executive power and the proper role of each branch of government. This approach, experts say, reinforces the principle that the judiciary's job is not to make policy, but to ensure that the rules of the Constitution are followed, regardless of the political stakes involved. Constitutional law scholar Jonathan Turley notes that the court's opinion was careful not to question the motivations or goals behind President Trump's actions. Instead, the justices zeroed in on the legality of his methods, scrutinizing whether the executive branch had overstepped its authority. Turley explains that this distinction is crucial, as it preserves the separation of powers and prevents the judiciary from becoming entangled in partisan disputes. By focusing on the process, the court sends a message that even the most powerful leaders must operate within the legal framework established by the Constitution. Political analysts interpret the decision as a direct challenge to Trump's brand of populist nationalism. By curbing the president's unilateral authority, the ruling undermines his carefully cultivated image as a decisive leader who can act swiftly on behalf of the American people. Some commentators argue that this could have ripple effects on Trump's political capital, especially among supporters who value strong, independent executive action. The decision, they say, signals a reassertion of checks and balances at a time when executive power has been steadily expanding. With the Supreme Court's decision, the focus now shifts squarely to Congress. Lawmakers are faced with the responsibility of deciding whether to authorize new tariffs through formal legislation, a process that will require open debate, negotiation, and ultimately, a recorded vote. This shift places the issue of trade policy back in the hands of the people's representatives, where it can be subject to public scrutiny and democratic accountability. Legal commentator Melissa Murray points out that by handing the issue back to lawmakers, the court is forcing Congress to confront the complexities of trade policy head-on. No longer can lawmakers avoid taking a clear position. They must now engage in public debate and cast votes that will be on the record for all to see. This, Murray argues, is a return to the foundational principles of representative democracy, where major policy decisions are made through transparent legislative processes rather than executive fiat. However, with Congress deeply divided along partisan lines, the prospect of meaningful legislative action remains uncertain. Many observers predict that legislative gridlock is likely, as competing interests and ideological differences make consensus difficult to achieve. As a result, U.S. trade policy may remain in a state of limbo, with businesses, workers, and international partners left waiting for clarity on the nation's direction. The Supreme Court's ruling has ignited a political firestorm on Capitol Hill, shifting the battleground from the courts to the halls of Congress. Lawmakers are now under intense pressure from constituents, lobbyists, and party leaders to take a stand, and the coming weeks are expected to be marked by heated debates, high-stakes negotiations, and intense media scrutiny. As the dust settles, one thing is clear: the next chapter in America's trade policy will be defined by intense political conflict and public debate. The outcome will shape not only the nation's economic future, but also the balance of power between the branches of government for years to come. The Supreme Court's decision has split the nation, with critics celebrating a victory for the rule of law, and Trump supporters decrying judicial activism. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer hailed the ruling as a win for the Constitution and American families. The White House condemned the decision, calling it an attack on the president's ability to fight for fair trade. Trump himself lashed out on social media, vowing to continue his America First fight by other means. The ruling has deepened political divisions, with both sides viewing it through a partisan lens. For opponents, it's a restoration of constitutional norms. For supporters, it's a betrayal. The fallout will shape the political landscape for years to come. The economic fallout is immediate, with the Treasury facing the prospect of refunding over $200 billion in illegal tariffs. Plans to use tariff revenue for household rebates are now in jeopardy. Companies reliant on Chinese imports will see costs drop, but industries that benefited from tariffs face renewed foreign competition. The sudden policy reversal creates winners and losers, disrupting business strategies nationwide. For farmers, the end of tariffs could mean renewed access to export markets, but uncertainty remains. Households may see lower prices, but job losses in protected sectors are possible. The overall economic shockwave is volatile and unpredictable. The ruling signals to the world that unilateral American protectionism is on shaky ground, opening the door for renewed global dialogue. US-China negotiations are fundamentally altered, with the administration losing its biggest bargaining chip. Allies like Canada and the EU may welcome the decision, hoping for a shift toward cooperation. However, years of trade wars have damaged America's reputation as a reliable partner. Rebuilding trust will be a long process, as countries have already diversified away from the US. The world is watching to see if America pivots back to a rules-based order or descends into further turmoil. The next moves will define America's global economic role. The Supreme Court's ruling leaves Trump's America First trade vision in ruins, ending the era of unilateral executive action on tariffs. The future of U.S. trade policy is now uncertain, with legal battles, political warfare, and diplomatic maneuvering ahead. The ruling forces future presidents to build legislative coalitions for trade agendas, restoring democratic process. The era of the tariff man acting alone is over. This is more than a policy judgment, it's a reaffirmation of checks and balances. No president stands above the law, and the path forward will require debate, compromise, and lawmaking. America's trade future will be written not by decree, but through the constitutional process.